Hey, this is Scott, and today I'm going to go over my final thoughts and overall review of the Tamron 70-200 f2.8 G2. If you're new to this channel, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe if you want to see more in the future. I'll put a link on screen now and also down in the description below for the playlist about this lens. I have a first look video talking about the build quality and design, as well as an image quality video. Today I won't be going too much in detail about those things, just an overall recap, as well as a few other points that I haven't mentioned yet. So if you want to see anything in more detail, be sure to check that playlist. In terms of build quality and design, not a lot has changed since my first look video. The switches still bother me more than anything else on this lens. They do definitely get turned on and off quite a lot when you're carrying it on a strap. So if you are going to be using it that way, I recommend putting some tape over it. Unfortunately, that's just something you have to deal with if you want to get this lens. The tripod foot being Arca-Swiss compatible is just really great. It makes things so much faster and so much easier. Very good little touch there. As I said in my first look video, the position of the zoom ring doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would, unless I'm using a back-to-back with the Canon, then I get all messed up in my head, but as it is, it's just fine. It does have a little bit more resistance and it's a little bit less smooth than the Canon, but it's totally fine. It's not a problem at all. As I mentioned in my first look video, the lens hood does snap on just fine, but I actually find that compared to the Canon, if you're not really paying attention or if you're trying to do it really quickly, it is a bit easier to get it kind of misaligned and get all messed up. So if you're putting this lens hood on or reversing it and everything a lot, like to put in your bag and out of your bag, you might want to take your time with it and just definitely pay attention to what you're doing more than you might with some other lenses. Everything else, as far as the front and rear cap having a very nice design, the lens being weather sealed, having a fluorine coating, and the finish taking on fingerprints a little bit more than other lenses, especially when it's humid and my hands are all sticky, is pretty much factual, so that hasn't changed a lot since my first review. If you want to see that again in more detail, be sure to check the link in the description below. Touching quickly on image quality, it's great. The end, that's all you need to hear. It's sharp, has almost no chromatic aberration, it handles bokeh and flare very well, and a vignette's pretty much on par with what you would expect from any other lens in this category. Again, if you want to see that in more detail, be sure to check the image quality video in the description below. There's a lot more samples and you can download all the files from that review. So now let's talk about the VC. Again, it's great, cut, you don't need to hear any more. It is very effective. I found that at 200 millimeters, I could confidently handhold down to about 1/8 of a second or so. The Canon could also do pretty well in this regard, but the Tamron did have a little bit higher success rate. At 70 millimeters, I could handhold both the Tamron and the Canon at about half a second with a fairly decent hit rate. But the Tamron, I could hold up to about 1 full second at 70 millimeters and still get around 1 in 3 acceptably sharp. This is pretty cool because to be able to handhold a lens that's this big and heavy and still get a decent amount of motion blur for like waterfalls or something like that is pretty fun. The VC on the Tamron is also a little bit quieter than the Canon, which you can hear here. I did have one weird situation with the VC on the Tamron though. I was shooting portraits, I believe at about 200 millimeters and 1/20th of a second, and I was shooting in portrait mode. I don't know if that makes a difference, but I could see in the viewfinder that it didn't seem to be stabilized like it usually is. So I took a bunch of shots and as expected, none of them were sharp. Of course there's motion blur, but the surrounding area wasn't sharp either, so it's not only the motion blur. I put it down and I started to shoot with Canon, and of course I got a bunch in focus. So I tried to go back to the Tamron, and when I picked it up the second time, immediately I noticed even in the viewfinder it seemed like the stabilization was working again. So I took a series of shots, and the same as with the Canon, I did get a lot of sharp shots this time, so I'm not sure what was happening with it the first time. It was kind of weird and I've never experienced it before or after that, so it might have just been some weird fluke. Maybe if I turned the camera itself on and off again it would have been fine, but I didn't do anything and I just put it down and picked it up again and it was working, so not sure what was happening there. If you've had an experience like that, let me know down in the comments below, or maybe it was just some weird thing. But again, the VC works really great on the Tamron, and I think you'll be very impressed with it. In control testing, the autofocus on the Canon seems just a little bit faster and locks on just a little bit sooner than the Tamron, but the difference is pretty negligible. In real-world use, I've tested it mostly with my son, and he's not the most cooperative subject, so it's a little bit difficult to get perfectly comparable results from the Tamron and the Canon, but in this situation, and also when I tested it with my son, I noticed that the Tamron had a slightly lower hit rate than the Canon did. Again, these were in identical situations, so even though both of these lenses may be able to do better in the hands of somebody better suited for this kind of photography, again, I was shooting in identical situations with identical settings side by side with these two cameras, so these should be a fair comparison, and they seem to be consistent in both situations. The Tamron seemed to have between 55 and 65% of usably sharp photos, while the Canon had between 75 and 100% acceptably sharp photos in some cases. This performance will of course depend on which case you're using on Canon cameras or how you have it set up in general, the autofocus system. I'm not much of an action sports photographer, so there's probably somebody better that can tell you exactly how that performs. As far as focus accuracy and consistency go, the Tamron is great. I've missed almost no shots, if not zero, because of the lens's fault. I did calibrate this lens with the Focal software, and it needed a slightly unnervingly high amount of adjustment on the tele end of +16, but it was incredibly consistent results, so I would definitely trust this lens's autofocus system in any situation. For the record, all of my Canon lenses also do need some level of autofocus micro adjustment to get their best performance, but in this case the 70-200 from Canon only needed a +2 or +3. So to wrap this up, the Tamron 70-200 f2.8 G2 lens is just quite incredible, especially when you think about the price. It's not cheap, but it is cheap compared to the Canon or the Nikon alternatives. Especially when you consider that the image quality is pretty much on par with both of those lenses, I don't think you can go wrong. There are a few design flaws that, while small, can be quite annoying, the switches being the first thing that comes to mind. While it is small, I'm not sure if it'd be a deal breaker. I would definitely have to cover them with tape if I use this lens on a strap. Whether or not that's something you want to do to save $500 or $1,000 is up to you. So overall, this is a serious winner of a lens, and if I didn't already have the Canon, it would be a very difficult decision. Sorry if I didn't make it any easier for you, but it would be very difficult for me too if I was making that same decision. Basically, if you want to save the money and you don't mind the switches, go for this lens. You can't go wrong. But if you have the money, or if the switches really are a deal breaker for you, then you might want to go with the Canon or the Nikon if that's what you shoot. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'd love to hear from you. Give me a thumbs up if you liked this video or found it helpful. Be sure to check out the other videos in this playlist if you want to see more details or even download some files for yourself. And as always, thank you for watching.